Let's do authentication for real. In your Firebase console, you'll see authentication teasing you over here in the sidebar. Click that, and it says we can authenticate and manage users from a variety of providers without server-side code. Sounds perfect. We can view the docs. I'll just keep those open in another tab. And there's a big button to say set up sign-in method. You'll see sign-in method is the next tab up here. I assume that's just going to take us right there. It does. Under sign-in method, I see email and password, phone, Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, and Anonymous. All kinds of sign-in providers. Firebase itself is made by Google, right? So I bet Google Auth is pretty easy to do. And if you're using Firebase, that means you definitely have a Google account. So let's click here. Google. There's an enable switch. Sure, let's enable that. Google sign-in is automatically configured on your connected iOS and web apps. To set up Google sign-in for your Android apps, no thanks. All right, so it says it's already set up. Piece of cake. Hit save. But what do we need to do in our app? Because we're never calling anything to do it, right? It's nice that we don't have to do any configuration on the Firebase side, except turning that on. So Firebase authentication. Provides backend services, easy-to-use SDKs, ready-made UI libraries. Supports authentication using passwords, phone numbers, popular federated identity providers like Google, Facebook, and Twitter, and more. Leverages industry standards like OAuth 2.0. So OAuth is an industry standard for authentication through third-party services. And thankfully, pretty much everything you're going to want to use implements that. And Firebase uses that in its own API to talk to these things. So what can we do? It looks like there's some UI elements we could drop in. That's okay. We'll make our own. Tells us how to do email and password-based authentication. And we can read about how to do the others. We want to do Google on the web. Before you begin, add Firebase to your JavaScript project. We've done that. On the sign-in method tab, enable that. We've done that. So handle the sign-in flow with the Firebase SDK. That's what we need to do. Create an instance of the Google provider object. Firebase.auth.googleAuthProvider. Notice that new there. So this must be a constructor. So where do we have Firebase in here? We have base.js, right? Whoops. Already did it in the morning class. Let's pretend that stuff wasn't there. And let's add it ourselves. So yeah, down here under our DB thing here, let's call new firebase.auth.googleAuthProvider. We have Firebase available, right? Because we imported it. I'll set a local variable called Google provider equals new firebase.auth.googleAuthProvider. Explode. Cannot read property Google Auth provider of undefined. So what is it saying is undefined? This is an error you get a lot. Yeah, it's saying firebase.auth is undefined. What gives? We do. Just like we had to separately import Firebase/database, we need to import Firebase/auth. We don't need to name it anything. We just need to import it because it just adds this auth key to the Firebase object we already have. So just import Firebase auth, and that error should go away. So now we have this provider. Okay, create an instance of the Google Provider object. Optional, specify additional OAuth scopes. No thanks. Blah, blah, blah. Authenticate with Firebase using the Google Provider object. You can prompt your users to sign in with their Google accounts either by opening a pop-up window or by redirecting to the sign-in page. The redirect method is preferred on mobile devices. We're not on a mobile device. Let's sign up with a pop-up window. Call sign in with pop-up. So that would be firebase.auth open close parens dot sign in with pop-up, and you pass in that provider. So when do we actually want this to happen? When we want to, at the time when we want to sign in, right? This is how we actually sign in. So when I click the sign in button. So we'll call sign in with pop-up on whatever firebase.auth returns. So I'll make another local variable here called auth, and that will be the result of firebase.auth open close parens. Or I could call app.auth on my Firebase app. But I want to be able to use these now for my sign-in component, because that's what actually needs those. So if I wanted to import this thing, rebase create class, I exported that as default, right? So I could always say import base from /base. What about these things? What if I export them? I can only have one default export. But doing this will make these named exports. So I'll have an export named Google Provider and an export named auth. So how do I import those? How do I import named exports? We have done it before. John? Curly braces. Just like this. React is the default export from React. Component is a named export. So if we want to import it, we just put curly braces around it. So I could import base and then in curly braces, auth and Google Provider. I don't actually need base in here though. I don't need any of the rebase stuff. I just need my authentication stuff. So now, what I want to happen when I sign in, I'll call handle auth, but I need to actually do this sign in business. So I have this auth object here, the result of firebase.auth, and I want to call sign in with pop-up, and I pass that the provider, in this case my Google provider. So inside my component, I'll make another function called authenticate. This is not a class, so I just need to make that as a variable. Const authenticate. This auth object I imported, dot sign in. You see all these options with pop-up. And it needs a provider as its argument, and we have imported Google Provider already. And then we still need to call handle auth when this finishes, right? Notice their example. Sign in with pop-up dot then, and then some function. Some function that should run when it finishes. It says it gives us a Google access token. So the function we pass in will receive an argument. So I'll call dot sign in with popup dot then, and I'll pass it handle auth. And it looks like handle auth will now receive this result object, whatever that is. So in handle auth, I will just add result and do a console log. So what's with this dot then business? Anyone seen that before? Anybody know what that is? Yeah, Josh. It waits till this is done before it moves on. So sign in with pop-up is asynchronous, meaning it takes it a minute. It's going to have to open up a pop-up, wait for the user to do some interaction, and it's not going to stop your code from continuing to execute while it does that. So it'll start the sign in with pop-up process, but it'll do it in the background, and then it will happily just run the next line of code. So if you have something that you need to wait until that's finished to run, there are lots of ways of doing asynchronous stuff. One way would be to just pass in a callback if it were written that way. But the way this was written, sign in with pop-up returns an object called a promise. We're not going to get real deep into promises, but it's a relatively modern way to do asynchronous stuff. So it returns this object that you can call dot then on and pass dot then a callback, and that's what will happen when it finishes. So it leaves it kind of readable. Auth, sign in with pop-up, and then, and only then, run whatever comes next. Handle auth. Let's see what happens. I'm expecting this pop-up to appear, and I'm expecting handle auth to console log something. Click sign in. Well, it just signed me right in still. That's because my onClick is still handle auth. I want it to call authenticate. My new function. Click sign in. Opens up a pop-up. Choose my Google account, and it tells me that it will then redirect me to noteherderwhatever.firebaseapp.com. I will log in as my fretless self. Here I am, and in the console, I see this object. So this is what was passed to auth handler. And it looks like the object has a user key and some other stuff. So result.user is all this. It has display name, email. That's handy. It has my avatar. UID. So this must be the unique identifier for my Google account. So again, I console logged result. So this would be result.user.uid. So back in app, in handle auth, instead of console logging that, instead of setting the UID to dstruce, I will set it to result.user.uid. Sign in. Let's look in my DevTools, and I see UID is that thing now. Cool. Seems like maybe sign out should do a little more than just this. I did this Firebase sign in Seems like I should need to tell Firebase to sign out. See if that example had anything like that. Yeah. To sign out, a user call sign out. So firebase.auth.signout. And looks like it also returns a promise that I can call .then on. So app is going to need that auth import as well. So I'm already importing base from base. That's not actually, that's one of ours. Base, comma, curly brace auth, right? Because it's a named export. I'll put that under the CSS. I like that better. So I'm importing base and auth. This is the default export from base, and this is the named export for authentication. So then sign out, instead of just setting state, I can call auth.signout. And that is also asynchronous. So if I wanted to, I could say .signout.then, and only then call set state. But then needs a function passed in. So pass in an arrow function that calls this .set state to set the UID back to null. Make sense? So this would make it so that signed in would return false, but we also want to make sure we're actually signed out of Firebase. So we call auth.signout. Does it work? Sign in. Sign out. Beautiful. Add Google authentication via Firebase. Not so bad. Questions?